Everyone in the Aurelia Grand ballroom knew Clara Voss did not tolerate mistakes, but no one expected her to humiliate a janitor in front of her entire executive team. The final rehearsal for her company's billion-dollar infrastructure launch was supposed to prove one thing: that Clara controlled every room she entered. Then she saw Damon Rell standing inside the VIP security line with a mop in his hand, quietly polishing a brass fixture near the stage. Her voice cut through the ballroom like glass. "Men like you don't belong inside a secured perimeter." The executives went silent. A few looked away. Her head of security, Gavin Price, saw everything and said nothing. Damon did not argue. He simply stepped back, lowered his eyes, and returned to work. But what no one noticed was that Damon had already seen something far more dangerous than Clara's pride. A man in a white server's jacket who had been in the ballroom for hours without serving a single drink. A man who kept touching his left pocket. A man whose eyes never left the stage. Damon warned hotel security. They dismissed him. He warned Gavin. Gavin trusted the paperwork instead. By 8 p.m., the ballroom was packed with investors, politicians, cameras, and reporters. Clara stepped onto the stage smiling like nothing in the world could touch her. And in the front left corner, the fake server finally moved his hand toward his jacket. Damon started forward, but Gavin blocked him. In that split second, Damon had to choose between staying in his place or breaking every rule in the room. 3 seconds later, Gavin was on one knee, a gun hit the marble floor, and everyone realized the janitor Clara had mocked might be the only reason she was still alive. The Aurelia Grand Hotel looked like the kind of place where ordinary people were expected to lower their voices. Its lobby rose 4 stories high, wrapped in white marble, gold-veined columns, and chandeliers so large they seemed less like decorations and more like warnings. Every polished surface reflected wealth. Every uniformed employee moved with rehearsed precision. Even the flowers in the crystal vases looked chosen by committee, arranged to suggest elegance without ever appearing accidental. By 7 o'clock that morning, Damon Rell had already been inside the building for an hour. He moved through the service corridor with a gray supply cart, a clean mop, 2 folded towels, and the quiet discipline of a man who did not waste motion. He wore the dark maintenance uniform of the Aurelia Grand, his name stitched in small white letters above his chest pocket. Most guests never looked long enough to read it. To them, he was part of the hotel's invisible machinery, like the elevators, the lights, the polished floors that somehow stayed spotless no matter how many expensive shoes crossed them. Damon preferred it that way. At 38, he had learned that being invisible could be useful. It kept questions away. It allowed him to move through rooms without becoming part of them. It gave him space to think, to observe, to survive. And survival for Damon was not an abstract word. It was the reason he clocked in before sunrise, took extra shifts when they were available, and left the hotel each evening with enough energy to cook dinner for his daughter Isla, check her homework, and pretend he was not more tired than he looked. The hotel manager, Maren Holt, often said Damon was one of the most reliable people on staff. He never complained. He never arrived late. He handled difficult jobs without drama, and difficult guests without reaction. In his personnel file, Maren had written 3 words that summarized everything the hotel needed to know about him: quiet, professional, dependable. What the file did not say was that Damon noticed things. He noticed when a guest's smile did not match their hands. He noticed when a security guard looked at doors but forgot windows. He noticed when people entered a room trying too hard to appear as if they belonged there. He noticed the difference between nervousness and preparation, between arrogance and fear, between a person carrying a tray and a person using a tray as cover. That morning, none of those instincts were supposed to matter. Damon had only been assigned to the second-floor grand ballroom, where the final rehearsal for Voss Meridian Group's major corporate launch was taking place. The event was scheduled for that evening, and the entire hotel had been preparing for 3 days. The ballroom was the Aurelia Grand's masterpiece. Its ceiling was painted in soft ivory and framed with gold trim. Long windows overlooked the city. The stage at the front of the room had been built overnight, fitted with a glass podium, curved LED panels, and lighting rigs designed to make whoever stood there look almost untouchable. Rows of round tables filled the space, each dressed in white linen silver chargers, and crystal glasses aligned so precisely that even a half-inch mistake could be seen from across the room. Tonight, Clara Voss would stand on that stage. Damon knew her name before she arrived. Everyone did. Clara Voss was the CEO of Voss Meridian Group, a woman whose reputation entered rooms before she did. She had taken control of the company after her father's retirement and turned it from a respected regional firm into a national force. Business magazines called her brilliant. Competitors called her ruthless. Employees, depending on whether she had promoted or dismissed them, called her either visionary or impossible. To Damon, she was simply the client. A powerful client, yes. A demanding client, absolutely, but still a client. The ballroom had brass fixtures that needed polishing before noon, and Damon cared more about those fixtures than he cared about Clara Voss's reputation. At least that was what he told himself. The first warning came just after 10. Damon was working along the eastern wall, wiping dust from a decorative sconce, when the service door near the corridor opened. A man in a white server's jacket stepped inside, pushing a cart loaded with water glasses. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about him. The ballroom was full of outside vendors, catering staff, decorators, lighting technicians, and security personnel. Strangers had been coming and going all morning, but Damon's hands slowed on the brass fixture. The man stopped too close to the wall. A real server would have moved toward the catering station or checked with the banquet captain. This man did neither. He stood behind the cart and let his eyes travel toward the stage. Not casually, not curiously. He looked at the stage the way a person looked at a locked door they had already decided to open. Damon kept wiping the fixture. The man touched his left jacket pocket once quickly. Then again 10 seconds later. His face was calm, but his body was too still. He was trying to look like part of the room, and that was exactly what made him wrong. Damon did not stare. He did not approach. He simply filed the detail away. At 11:30, Clara Voss arrived. She entered the ballroom with her assistant, Elena Park, 2 executives, and her head of security, Gavin Price. Clara was dressed in a tailored cream suit that made her look polished rather than soft. Her blonde hair was pulled back neatly. Her posture was straight, her eyes sharp, and the room seemed to tighten around her the moment she stepped inside. Gavin Price followed a few steps behind, compact, broad-shouldered, and expressionless. He wore a dark suit with no visible earpiece, which meant the earpiece was hidden well. His eyes moved across the ballroom in a practiced sweep: exits, stage, lighting rigs, staff service doors. Damon recognized the habit immediately. Gavin was not careless. That made what happened later more dangerous. Clara walked to the center of the room and began issuing instructions before anyone had welcomed her properly. "The podium is too far right," she said. "Move it 6 inches left. The investor table should have a cleaner sightline to the screen. And why is the lighting warmer on this side?" Elena typed quickly on her tablet. The executives nodded as if every word from Clara carried financial consequences. Damon continued working. He had crossed behind the thin velvet rope around the VIP section to reach a fixture near the stage. The rope had been placed after he started his route, and he barely noticed it. His job was to polish the fixtures. The fixture was inside the boundary, so Damon stepped inside and did the work. That was when Clara saw him. She stopped speaking mid-sentence. The silence spread faster than any command. "You," Clara said. Damon turned, cloth still in hand. "Ma'am, what are you doing on this side of the security line?" Her voice was not loud, but it carried through the ballroom with perfect clarity. Elena looked up from her tablet. 2 executives shifted their attention toward Damon. Gavin Price glanced over from near the entrance but did not move. Damon kept his tone even. "Finishing the brass fixtures. I'll be out of your way in 2 minutes." Clara's eyes narrowed slightly, not because of what he said, but because of how calmly he said it. "This area is restricted," she said. "Do you understand that?" "Yes, ma'am." then you understand that cleaning staff do not belong inside a secured perimeter during a high-level event rehearsal. A few people nearby grew very still. Damon felt the shape of the room changing. It was no longer about a rope. It was about Clara reminding everyone who had authority and who did not. He lowered the cloth. The fixture needed to be finished from this angle. Clara gave a short, humorless breath. Fixtures are not the priority here. Damon said nothing. Security decisions stage access perimeter control. These are handled by qualified professionals, Clara continued, not by someone carrying a mop. The words landed cleanly. No one defended him. No one laughed openly, but Damon heard the faint movement of discomfort around the room. Elena looked down. One executive studied the floor. Gavin Price watched from his position near the entrance and chose silence. Damon looked at Clara for one moment. He did not look angry. He did not look ashamed. If anything, he looked as though he had just confirmed something he already suspected. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He wiped the last inch of the fixture, folded the cloth, stepped back over the rope, and walked toward the service corridor. Behind him, Clara resumed speaking as if the interruption had been nothing more than a stain removed from a tablecloth. But Damon was no longer thinking about Clara's insult. He was thinking about the man in the white server's jacket. Because while everyone in that ballroom had been watching a CEO put a janitor in his place, the stranger near the eastern wall had been watching the stage, and his hand had touched his left pocket again. By noon, Damon understood two things clearly. First, Clara Voss had built a room full of people trained to listen upward and ignore downward. Second, if the man in the white jacket was what Damon suspected he was, that mistake could get someone killed before the night was over. By 1 o'clock, the Aurelia Grand Ballroom had become a room full of people who believed they were prepared. Lighting crews adjusted the final angles above the stage. Caterers moved between tables with silver trays and folded napkins. Members of Clara Voss's executive team stood in small groups, speaking in low voices about investors' press coverage and political guests. Gavin Price's security team checked entrances, confirmed badge access, and repeated the same quiet movements with the confidence of men who trusted their system. Damon Rell watched all of it from the edges. He moved slowly along the eastern wall with his supply cart replacing towels, collecting discarded tape, and polishing anything that needed attention. To everyone else, he was simply doing his job. That was what made it possible for him to keep watching the man in the white server's jacket. The man had not left. For nearly 3 hours, Damon had seen him move from the eastern corridor to the back service table, then closer to the stage, then toward the side wall again. He never carried food. He never poured water. He never responded when the banquet captain called for servers. The cart he had pushed into the ballroom still held the same untouched glasses from the morning. That was not poor work. That was cover. Damon had spent years trying not to live like the man he used to be. He had chosen this hotel because the hours were predictable and the work was clean. No convoys, no threat reports. No late-night calls telling him a route had changed or a client had ignored instructions. No blood on expensive floors. No need to stand between a stranger and a bullet because someone with money had underestimated danger. He had left that life behind. Or he had tried to. His daughter Isla was the reason. She was 12 now, old enough to notice when he came home with a stiff shoulder or a look in his eyes he could not explain. When she was younger, she used to ask why he always sat facing restaurant entrances, why he checked the hallway before opening the apartment door, why loud sounds made his hand tighten around whatever he was holding. Damon had learned to smile and say old habits were hard to break. But old habits were not the problem. Old instincts were. And now every one of them was telling him the same thing the man in the white jacket was waiting for a moment. Damon pushed his cart toward the service desk near the main corridor. Luca Marin, a young hotel security officer, stood there with a radio clipped to his shoulder. Luca was not careless. Damon had watched him work before. He took notes, checked doors, remembered faces. That was why Damon chose him. "Luca," Damon said quietly. The younger man looked up. "Everything okay?" "No." That single word changed Luca's expression. Damon angled his body so they were not obviously speaking about someone across the room. White server's jacket, medium height, dark hair, standing near the eastern wall close to the water cart. Luca glanced over, then back. What about him? He doesn't move like catering. He's been inside this room for almost 3 hours and hasn't served anything. Same glasses on the cart. He keeps checking his left jacket pocket. Twice in 10 minutes this morning. Again near the stage. Luca's face tightened with concentration. You sure he's not one of the outside vendor staff? I know the regular team. I know the temporary crew they brought in yesterday. I don't know him. That doesn't mean I know, Damon said. That's why I'm reporting behavior, not identity. Luca hesitated, then lifted his radio and made a quiet inquiry. Damon waited, eyes moving just enough to keep the white jacket in his peripheral vision. After a moment, Luca listened to the response in his earpiece, then lowered his hand. He's cleared, Luca said. Name's Nolan Trent. Vendor paperwork came through this morning. Catering says he's on the approved list. Paperwork can be made to look clean. Luca gave him a look that was not disrespectful, only uncertain. Damon, I can't remove someone from a secured event because he looks strange to you. He doesn't look strange. He behaves wrong. I'll keep an eye on him. Damon heard the finality in the answer. He nodded once and pushed his cart away. For the next hour, he worked and watched. Nolan Trent changed position 4 times. Each movement gave him a different line of sight to the podium. He stopped near the left side of the stage and pretended to adjust glasses that had already been aligned. He moved behind a lighting stand and looked upward, not at the rigging, but at the angle between the stage and the VIP entrance. Once, when Clara crossed the ballroom with Gavin and Elena, Nolan lowered his eyes too quickly. Damon felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. At 3:30, he went back to Luca. This time, he did not speak like a man sharing concern. He spoke like a man delivering a report. 4 positions in 70 minutes, Damon said, all with clean sight lines to the stage. No service activity. Left pocket check at least 6 times since noon. He's using the card as a reason to stay mobile. Luca listened more carefully now. Damon could see doubt forming behind his eyes. I believe you saw what you saw, Luca said. But his credentials are valid. Gavin Price's team cleared the perimeter. If I pull him without cause and I'm wrong, I could lose my job. Damon looked at him for a moment. He understood that fear. He lived with a version of it every day. I'm not asking you to be brave, Damon said. I'm asking you to be accurate. Luca looked away. That was his answer. Damon returned to the ballroom with something tightening inside him. It was not anger. Anger burned too hot and wasted too much. This was older, colder, more useful. It was the feeling that came when a situation began narrowing down to only one possible outcome. He thought of Isla. She would be getting home from school soon. There was leftover chicken in the refrigerator. He had promised to help her with a science project that involved cardboard string and a level of glitter Damon had already decided was unreasonable. If he did nothing, he could clock out after the event, drive home, and still be a normal father by night. If he acted and was wrong, he might be fired. Worse, he might be arrested. A janitor putting hands on a guest, a vendor or a security professional at a high-profile corporate event would not be treated kindly. Not in a ballroom full of cameras, executives, and people who believed titles were evidence of truth. For 2 years, Damon had built a quiet life by staying out of the center of rooms. Now the center of the room was where the danger was. At 6:30, Damon found Gavin Price near the back corridor. Gavin had just finished speaking with 2 members of his team and was checking something on his phone when Damon approached. Mr. Price, Damon said, I need 60 seconds. Gavin looked at him with the faint impatience of a man already managing too much. You have 30. Damon gave him everything: Nolan's movement pattern, the repeated pocket checks, the unused cart, the timing, the angles, the way his body changed whenever Clara neared the stage. He kept his voice calm. He did not exaggerate. He did not beg. He simply placed the facts between them. Gavin listened without interrupting. When Damon finished, Gavin glanced toward the front of the room. Nolan was standing near the side wall, towel draped over his arm. His credentials were verified, Gavin said. Background check cleared. Vendor relationship confirmed. My team has already run the perimeter. Then your system missed him. Gavin's eyes returned to Damon. The temperature between them dropped. You need to be careful with what you suggest. I am being careful. No, Gavin said softly. You are stepping outside your role. The words echoed Clara's earlier insult, but Damon no longer felt the sting of it. Something in him had shifted. In the morning, he had wanted only to be left alone, to remain invisible, to finish the fixtures and go home. Now he understood that invisibility had become part of the problem. Everyone in the room had mistaken silence for ignorance. They had mistaken a uniform for a boundary. Damon looked directly at Gavin. If I'm wrong, you lose 2 minutes, he said. If you're wrong, someone may not leave this room alive. For the first time, Gavin's expression flickered. Then the moment passed. I'll have someone do a visual check, Gavin said. That is all. Damon nodded slowly. That's all I needed to know. He walked away, and with every step, the decision became clearer. He could not make Clara respect him. He could not make Luca risk his position. He could not make Gavin admit that a janitor had seen what his trained team had missed. But he could stay close. He could watch the hand. He could count the distance to the stage, the nearest table, the nearest exit, the time it would take to cross the room if Nolan moved first. By 7 o'clock, the guests began arriving. By 7:30, the ballroom was full of money power, perfume, camera flashes, and polished smiles. Clara moved through the crowd like a woman born for the spotlight. Gavin stood near the VIP section, alert but still looking where his training told him to look. Damon stood near the service table holding a tray of water glasses no one had asked him to carry. Across the room, Nolan Trent disappeared from the eastern wall. Damon set the tray down, and for the first time that day, he stopped pretending he was only there to clean. The moment Nolan Trent disappeared from the eastern wall, Damon Rell felt the entire ballroom change shape. Nothing visible happened to anyone else. The investors kept talking. The photographers adjusted their lenses. The waiters moved between tables with trays balanced on steady hands. Clara Voss stood near the VIP section, smiling at a city councilman, while Elena Park hovered at her shoulder with a tablet. Gavin Price remained by the edge of the secured area, watching the entrances with the composed focus of a man who believed every real threat would announce itself through the channels he had prepared. But Damon knew better. A threat did not always come through the main door. Sometimes it wore the correct jacket, carried the correct paperwork, and stood quietly in the corner until every important person in the room had decided he belonged there. Damon left the service table without the tray. He did not run. Running would have drawn eyes, and eyes created confusion before action. Instead, he moved along the outer edge of the ballroom, slipping behind the last row of tables, passing between 2 catering stations, keeping his shoulders loose and his expression neutral. To anyone watching, he was just another member of the hotel staff, crossing the room with a task in mind. Inside, he was counting. 30 feet to the side entrance, 12 steps to the nearest table, 2 guards at the main doors, 1 near the rear exit, Gavin at the VIP line, Clara's position shifting closer to the stage, Nolan missing for 15 seconds. 15 seconds was too long. Damon reached the eastern side entrance and looked into the corridor. Empty. No footsteps. No abandoned badge. No sign of struggle. The service cart Nolan had used all afternoon sat against the wall, still loaded with untouched glasses. A white towel lay folded across the handle, placed too neatly, as if someone had set down a costume piece after deciding he no longer needed the full performance. Damon's jaw tightened. He turned back toward the ballroom and scanned from left to right. He did not search for a face first. Faces could hide. Bodies told the truth. He looked for posture, stillness, weight distribution, hands. Then he saw him. Nolan had moved to the front left corner of the room, partly hidden between a tall floor lamp and the shadowed edge of the stage. He had another towel draped over one arm. His head was slightly lowered, but his eyes were fixed on the podium. His left hand rested near his jacket, fingers stiff, not fidgeting now. Waiting. Damon started forward. He kept to the outside of the tables, cutting behind guests whenever possible. The ballroom had grown louder, fuller, warmer. Laughter rose from a cluster of investors near the bar. A reporter tested a camera light. Someone touched Damon's arm and asked for sparkling water. He gave a small nod and moved past without stopping. Every second mattered now. Clara stepped onto the stage. The change in the room was instant. Conversation softened, then faded. Chairs shifted, glasses lowered, cameras lifted. The spotlight caught Clara's cream suit and made her look almost untouchable, exactly the way the stage designers had intended. She walked to the glass podium, adjusted the microphone with one precise motion, and looked out at the crowd with a polished smile. "Good evening," she began. "Thank you all for being here tonight." Damon was 25 feet from Nolan. Nolan's shoulders changed. It was subtle, but Damon saw it. The man's breathing shortened. His left elbow drew inward. The towel slipped half an inch down his arm. His eyes narrowed on Clara, not with hesitation, but with focus. Damon quickened his pace. He was almost close enough when Gavin Price stepped directly into his path. "Stop," Gavin said. Damon's eyes stayed past him. "Move!" Gavin's expression hardened. "Staff are not permitted in the forward section during the address. There's no time." "There is always time to follow instruction." Damon looked at him then. Front left corner, white jacket, between the lamp and the stage edge. His hand is going into his jacket. Gavin did not turn. That was the worst part. Not that he disbelieved Damon, not even that he had dismissed the warnings before. It was that he was still deciding whether a janitor had the right to be correct. "Return to the service area," Gavin said, voice low and final. Damon felt the room narrow around them. Clara's voice continued through the speakers, calm and confident. "This project represents more than investment. It represents trust. Trust in our city, trust in our future, and trust in the people who build what others only imagine." Trust. The word almost made Damon laugh. Behind Gavin, Nolan's left hand slipped beneath the jacket. Damon made the decision before fear could enter it. He stepped to Gavin's left. Gavin reached to block him, trained reflex, moving fast, but Damon had already read the angle. His right forearm redirected Gavin's hand across his own body. Damon pivoted behind him, caught the pressure point at Gavin's shoulder, and applied controlled force downward and forward. Gavin dropped to one knee with a sharp grunt. Gasps broke from the nearest table. Damon released him immediately and moved. For one stunned second, Gavin did not rise. Not because he was badly hurt, but because his body had been given a command faster than his pride could answer. Damon crossed the remaining distance in a burst. Nolan's hand came out of his jacket. The gun was small, black, and already lifting. Damon reached him before the arm fully extended. His left hand clamped around Nolan's wrist and drove the weapon downward. His right hand caught the man's elbow, locking the joint before Nolan could twist free. Nolan tried to pull back, but Damon drove his shoulder into the man's chest and slammed him against the wall with enough force to empty the air from his lungs. The gun hit the marble floor. A woman screamed. Damon planted his foot on the weapon and tightened his grip on Nolan's arm. The man fought once, wild and desperate, but Damon shifted his weight, turned the wrist another inch, and ended the struggle before it became a spectacle. "Don't," Damon said quietly. Nolan froze. For 3 seconds, the ballroom did not understand what had happened. Clara had stopped speaking. Her hands rested on the sides of the podium. The microphone carried the faint sound of her breath through the speakers. 200 guests stared toward the front left corner where a janitor had one man pinned to the wall and a gun beneath his shoe. Then the room erupted. Security moved at last. Gavin's team rushed from the entrance and rear exit radios, crackling voices rising. Guests pushed back from tables. Chairs scraped against marble. Someone shouted for everyone to stay calm, which only made people panic faster. Cameras swung toward Damon. Phones lifted. A glass fell and shattered near the aisle. Gavin was on his feet now, face pale beneath his professional control. He saw the gun first, then Nolan, then Damon, and Damon saw the terrible realization pass through him. Gavin had not stopped the threat. He had stopped the man trying to stop it. Two security officers took Nolan from Damon's grip, forcing his hands behind his back and dragging him away from the wall. Another guard retrieved the gun only after Damon lifted his foot. The entire process should have felt like relief, but Damon knew the danger was not over until the stage exits and service corridors were clear. "Check the eastern corridor," Damon said. One of the guards looked at him uncertain. Now Damon snapped. The guard moved. That was the unexpected thing after everything. Even with the gun on the floor and Nolan restrained, Damon still had to fight to be heard. Gavin caught the order and repeated it into his radio. "Sweep the eastern corridor. Lock down all service access. Confirm no secondary suspect." Only then did the machinery of security begin working in the right direction. Damon stepped back from the wall. His palm burned. He looked down and saw a thin cut across his skin where a metal bracket had caught him during the struggle. Blood gathered slowly bright against his hand. He took the fallen towel from the floor, folded it once, and pressed it against the wound. Across the room, Clara Voss still stood at the podium. She was looking directly at him, not at his uniform, not at the mop cart waiting near the service table, not at the role she had assigned him in her mind that morning. At him. Damon held her gaze for a moment, then looked away. The ballroom was full of noise, now security commands, frightened whispers, police sirens approaching from outside. But inside Damon, everything had gone very still. He had acted. He had broken the rules. He had exposed the danger. But the hardest part was only beginning, because saving Clara Voss's life did not erase what had happened. It only forced everyone in that room to finally see it. The sirens reached the Aurelia Grand before anyone in the ballroom had fully returned to themselves. They came first as a distant sound behind the thick hotel windows, then closer, sharper, multiplying through the streets below until red and blue light began flashing across the marble walls. Guests stood in uneven clusters near the back of the room, some whispering into phones, some staring at the stage as if the event might still continue if no one admitted how close they had come to disaster. A few reporters had already started recording their instincts moving faster than their fear. Damon Rell stayed near the front left corner, one hand wrapped in a folded white towel, his breathing controlled. The gun was gone now, sealed into an evidence bag by a security officer whose hands shook slightly despite his training. Nolan Trent had been taken through the service corridor in restraints. Gavin Price's team had swept the eastern hallway, the kitchen entrance, the storage rooms, and the loading area. There was no second attacker, no planted device, no hidden partner waiting beyond the stage. Only one man with forged access, a loaded weapon, and a room full of important people who had trusted the wrong signs. Damon should have felt relief. Instead, he felt the old exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion. That would come later when the adrenaline drained out of him and the cut across his palm started to sting properly. This was something heavier. The kind of tiredness that came from being right too late for anyone to thank you without also having to face why they had ignored you first. Police officers moved through the ballroom with practiced urgency. Hotel security began directing guests toward controlled exits. Clara Voss was escorted off the stage by Elena Park, though she resisted the movement for a moment, still looking toward Damon. For the first time since she had entered the hotel that morning, Clara did not seem to be controlling the room. She seemed caught inside it. Gavin approached Damon slowly. There was no authority in his walk, now only caution. His jacket was slightly twisted from the way Damon had dropped him. He had straightened it, but not well. A small detail, yet Damon noticed it. Men like Gavin usually repaired their appearance before they repaired anything else. "Your hand," Gavin said. "It's fine. It's bleeding. It's still fine." Gavin stopped a few feet away. For a moment, neither man spoke. Around them, officers took statements and security radios crackled with overlapping voices. The ballroom that had been designed to display control now looked like a beautiful room after a storm. Gavin glanced toward the place where the gun had fallen. "I should have listened." Damon looked at him. Yes. The directness of the answer struck harder than anger would have. Gavin nodded once accepting it. "The first time you came to Luca, the second time, when you came to me, all of it." Damon did not respond immediately. He studied Gavin's face and saw no performance there, no attempt to protect his pride, no careful excuse about protocol or paperwork or limited information, just the look of a man standing in the wreckage of a decision he could not undo. "Your system told you he was safe," Damon said. "My system was wrong." "No," Damon said quietly. "Your system was incomplete. There's a difference." Gavin looked at him then more sharply. Damon continued. "Paperwork can tell you who someone claims to be. It can't tell you what he's preparing to do in the next 10 seconds. Gavin absorbed that in silence. Before he could answer, a detective crossed the ballroom toward them. She was a woman in her late 40s, composed, observant, wearing a dark blazer and carrying a notebook instead of a tablet. Damon noticed the way she looked at the room before she looked at him. Not impressed, not overwhelmed, measuring. "Damon Rell?" she asked. "Yes. Detective Marielle Dane, I need your statement." Damon nodded. "Now, if you're able." "I'm able." She led him to a quieter area near the service corridor away from the guests and cameras. Damon sat in a folding chair beneath a wall sconce he had polished that morning. The detail almost amused him. That was how the day had started: brass fixtures, quiet work a plan to get home in time to help Isla with her school project. Detective Dane opened her notebook. "Tell me what you observed." So Damon told her. He described Nolan's first entrance through the eastern service door. The cart of untouched glasses, the way he watched the stage instead of the banquet captain, the repeated checks of his left pocket, the changing positions, the sight lines, the reports to Luca, the conversation with Gavin, the moment Clara stepped onto the stage, the hand moving toward the jacket, Gavin blocking him, the takedown. He kept emotion out of it. Facts mattered more. Detective Dane wrote steadily, occasionally asking him to clarify timing or distance. When Damon finished, she looked up from her notes. "You neutralized a trained security lead and an armed suspect within seconds," she said. "I stopped 2 people from doing the wrong thing at the wrong time." Her expression did not change, but her eyes sharpened. "That is not an answer to the question. It's the answer I have." She studied him for a moment. "You have formal training." Damon held her gaze. "A long time ago." "What kind?" "Personal protection, threat assessment, close quarters, military." Damon's silence answered more than he intended. Detective Dane did not push. She wrote something down, then closed the notebook halfway. "For what it's worth, several witnesses confirm you gave warnings before the incident." Damon gave a faint nod. "That helps." "It does." She paused. "It may also raise questions." "I know." And he did. By morning, the hotel would know more about him than it had known in 2 years. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough for people to look at him differently. Enough for Marin Holt to wonder why a man with his background had chosen to mop floors and polish brass. Enough for Clara Voss to see him not as invisible, but as a problem she had misread in front of a room full of powerful witnesses. When the detective left, Damon leaned back in the chair and pressed the towel more firmly around his palm. His phone buzzed. Isla. He looked at the screen for 2 seconds before answering. "Hey," he said, softening his voice before the word finished leaving his mouth. "Dad, are you still at work?" "Yes." "You said you'd be home for the science thing." "I know." There was a pause. "Did something happen?" Damon closed his eyes briefly. Around him, police lights flickered against the corridor wall. "There was an incident at the hotel." "I'm okay." "What kind of incident?" "The kind I'll explain when I get home." Another pause, longer this time. Isla was old enough now to hear what he did not say. "Are you hurt?" "Small cut on my hand, that's all. Promise." "I promise." She breathed out. "Okay, I saved you the glitter part." Despite everything, Damon smiled. "That was kind of you." "No, I just thought you'd mess it up. That sounds more accurate." When the call ended, the smile faded slowly. Damon slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked toward the ballroom doors. He had wanted a simple life for Isla. A life where his past did not enter rooms before him. A life where danger stayed in memory, not in hotel ballrooms under crystal chandeliers. Tonight had broken that illusion. A few minutes later, Elena Park appeared beside him holding a bottle of water. "Mr. Rell," she said carefully, "Miss Voss would like to speak with you. Privately, when you're ready." Damon looked at the bottle, then at Elena's face. She seemed nervous, but not because of him. Because she had seen the way Clara had spoken to him earlier, and now she had been sent to ask for a conversation no apology could make simple. Damon stood. "I'm ready now." Elena led him to a private holding room beside the ballroom. Inside, the noise of the investigation became a muffled hum. Clara stood near a low table, no longer wearing her structured jacket. Without it, she looked less like an executive carved out of certainty and more like a woman who had been forced to meet herself unexpectedly. Gavin stood near the far wall. Clara did not sit. Damon appreciated that. "I've been told you warned security more than once," she said. "I did, and no one acted." Damon looked at Gavin briefly. They acted according to what they trusted. Clara's face shifted. It was not comfort. If anything, his fairness seemed to make the shame worse. "That is generous," she said. "It's accurate." "No," Clara replied quietly. "It is generous. Accuracy would also include the fact that I dismissed you before anyone else did. Publicly." Damon said nothing. Clara's hands tightened once, then released. "This morning I saw your uniform before I saw you. I treated your position as proof of your limits. I said things in front of my team that were arrogant, unnecessary, and wrong." The room held still. Damon had heard powerful people apologize before. Usually they apologized like lawyers. Clara did not. Her voice was controlled but not polished. Each word seemed to cost something. "I owe you a real apology," she said. "Not because you saved my life, because I should not have needed you to save my life in order to respect you." That sentence changed the room more than any apology alone could have. Gavin looked down. Damon studied Clara for a long moment. He could have punished her with silence. He could have reminded her exactly what she had said, exactly how the room had reacted, exactly how small she had tried to make him before needing him to become larger than everyone else. But Damon was tired of rooms built around humiliation. "I accept your apology," he said. Clara exhaled almost invisibly. Gavin stepped forward. "And I owe you one too." Damon turned to him. "I let hierarchy make my decision," Gavin said. "Not evidence. You gave me evidence. I ignored it because of where it came from. That's the part you need to fix," Damon said. Gavin nodded. "I know." For the first time that day, the conflict began to loosen. It did not disappear. Nothing so real disappeared just because someone found the right words. But something had shifted. Clara had stopped defending her assumption. Gavin had stopped defending his protocol. And Damon, who had spent years avoiding the center of rooms, found himself standing in one without trying to escape it. Clara looked at his injured hand. "Let us have a doctor look at that." Damon almost refused. Then he thought of Isla asking him to promise. "All right," he said. It was a small answer, but for Damon it was not small at all. It meant he did not have to carry every consequence alone. It meant that maybe solving the conflict did not require disappearing again. Maybe it required allowing the people who had finally seen him clearly to do something useful with what they now understood. Outside the room, the investigation continued. Inside it, 3 people stood with the uncomfortable truth between them, no longer pretending it was anything else. 3 weeks later, the Aurelia Grand Ballroom looked almost exactly as it had before. That was the strange thing about expensive rooms. They recovered quickly. The marble had been polished until no mark remained where the gun had struck the floor. The wall near the front left corner had been repaired and repainted. The stage had been rebuilt, the lighting recalibrated, the white table linens replaced, and the crystal glasses arranged again in perfect circles beneath the chandeliers. To anyone who had not been there that night, the ballroom looked untouched. But Damon Rell could feel the difference the moment he walked in. It was not in the walls or the stage or the flowers. It was in the people. Security officers now looked at service doors with the same seriousness they gave the main entrance. Caterers checked in through a revised access point where badges were scanned twice and faces were matched by a live supervisor instead of a printed list. Every staff member, from servers to cleaners, had been told that if they saw something unusual, they could report it directly without waiting for a manager to decide whether their concern was important enough. That change had Clara Voss written all over it. Damon had not asked for it. He had not even expected it. Powerful people often apologized when a room forced them to, then returned to their habits once the discomfort faded. But Clara had not returned to herself. Or perhaps Damon thought she had finally started becoming someone else. He was not assigned to work the rescheduled event. Marin Holt had made that clear when she gave him the updated schedule. "You've been through enough," she had said. Damon had almost laughed at that. Enough was not a word life had ever respected. Still, he had planned to spend the evening at home with Isla. They were supposed to finish the science project they had postponed 3 weeks earlier. But that afternoon, Marin handed him an envelope with his name written on it in careful black ink. Inside were 2 guest passes. No note, no demand, no performance. Only 2 seats in the back of the ballroom. Damon would have thrown them away if Isla had not found them on the kitchen counter. "You're going," she said immediately. Damon looked up from cutting vegetables. "Am I?" "Yes. I don't remember giving you authority over my evening. I'm 12. I have authority over everything you pretend not to care about." He gave her a look. She gave it back stronger. Isla had his eyes, his stubbornness, and the frightening ability to see through him when he most wanted to disappear. Since the incident, she had asked questions carefully, never all at once. Damon had told her what he could. Not the whole of his past, not yet, but enough for her to understand that her father had once lived a life where danger was not unusual, and that he had left it because he loved her more than he loved being good at surviving. "You saved people," Isla said. "You don't have to stand on stage or anything, but maybe you should let yourself be in the room." Damon stopped cutting. That was the thing about children. They could say something simple and leave an adult no place to hide. So he went. He wore a dark jacket instead of his maintenance uniform, and Isla wore the blue dress she usually saved for school concerts. When they entered the Aurelia Grand through the front lobby, Damon felt more exposed than he had felt facing Nolan Trent. He was used to entering through side doors, service halls, employee corridors. Walking through the front with his daughter beside him felt like stepping into someone else's life. At the ballroom entrance, Luca Marin saw him first. For a moment, the young security officer looked uncertain. Then he straightened, not with fear, not with embarrassment, but with respect. "Mr. Rell," Luca said. "Good evening." Damon nodded. "Luca." Luca looked at Isla. "You must be Isla." She lifted her chin. "Depends who's asking." Luca smiled despite himself. "Someone who is glad your father came tonight." Damon felt Isla's hand slip into his. They took their seats near the back, exactly where the passes placed them. Damon was grateful for that. He did not want the front row. He did not want whispers following him down an aisle. He only wanted to see what Clara would do with a second chance. The room filled slowly. The guest list was smaller this time, but still powerful investors, officials, journalists, partners. Gavin Price stood near the VIP section again, but he was not the same man Damon had dropped to one knee. His eyes moved differently now, wider, less certain of where danger was supposed to come from. That, Damon thought, was improvement. At 8 o'clock, Clara Voss stepped onto the stage. She wore a charcoal suit this time, simple and severe. No softness, but less armor. She approached the podium and looked out at the room. For several seconds, she said nothing. The silence was not a mistake. 3 weeks ago, Clara began, "I stood in this ballroom prepared to speak about trust." The room grew still. "I intended to speak about financial trust, civic trust, institutional trust. But before I could finish that speech, I learned that trust means very little when it only moves in one direction." Damon felt Isla glance at him. Clara continued, her voice steady. "A system failed here, not because no one was present, not because no one was trained. It failed because the right warning came from a person the system had not been taught to value." No one moved. Clara looked briefly toward the back of the room, not long enough to expose Damon, but long enough for him to know she had found him. "I was part of that failure," she said. I mistook position for worth. I mistook a uniform for a limit. And I was wrong. The words landed with a force no polished corporate statement could have carried. She did not mention Damon's name. He was grateful. She did not turn him into a headline or a symbol. Instead, she turned the room toward the truth beneath what had happened. From this evening forward, Clara said, every Voss Meridian event project site and corporate facility will operate under a new reporting standard. No warning will be dismissed because of the job title of the person giving it. No worker will be treated as invisible simply because their work is done behind the scenes. If we build the future, then we will begin by seeing the people who hold the present together. For the first time all night, the room applauded. It began politely, as applause in rooms like that often did. Then it deepened. Not thunderous, not theatrical, but sincere enough that Damon felt something shift inside his chest. Isla squeezed his hand. Clara went on to deliver the launch presentation. The project still mattered. The investment still moved forward. The journalists still took notes, and the officials still smiled for photographs. But the heart of the evening had already happened. The real announcement was not about road steel or development contracts. It was about a woman powerful enough to command a room, choosing finally to correct herself in front of one. After the speech, Damon tried to leave quietly. He almost succeeded. Clara found him in the corridor outside the ballroom just as he and Isla were passing the row of brass sconces he had replaced days earlier. Gavin was with her, but he stayed a few steps back. "Mr. Rell?" Clara said. Damon turned. "Miss Voss." Her eyes moved to Isla and her expression softened. "You must be Isla." Isla looked her up and down. "You're the lady who was mean to my dad." The corridor froze. Damon closed his eyes for half a second. "Isla." Clara, to her credit, did not flinch. "Yes," she said. "I was." Isla studied her. "But you apologized." "I did. And you meant it." Clara looked at Damon, then back at Isla. "Yes." Isla considered this with the seriousness of a judge. "Okay, then don't do it again." For the first time since Damon had known her, Clara Voss laughed. Not a controlled laugh, a real one surprised out of her. "I'll do my best," she said. Damon looked down at his daughter and something in him eased. Not because the world was suddenly fair, it was not. Not because one apology could erase every insult or every year he had spent being underestimated. It could not. But because Isla had seen him stand in a room that once tried to shrink him, and he had not become smaller. He had not become cruel either. That mattered. Clara turned to Damon. "I meant what I said tonight." "I know. I also meant the offer, not the same one. Not a title designed to make me feel generous. If you ever want to consult on our safety protocols on your terms, I would value your judgment." Damon looked toward the ballroom, then at Isla. His old instinct was to refuse anything that pulled him back toward a life he had buried. But this did not feel like the old life. No convoy, no orders, no losing himself to someone else's danger. This was different. This was using what he knew without surrendering the peace he had built. "I'll think about it," he said. Clara nodded. She understood that was not a small answer. Gavin stepped forward then. "Your first recommendation." Damon looked at him. "Listen sooner." Gavin nodded. "Already written down." Later that night, Damon and Isla drove home through the city with the windows cracked open. The streets shone under amber lights. Isla leaned her head against the seat, tired but awake. "Dad, yeah. Were you scared?" Damon kept his eyes on the road. "Yes, when he thought about the gun. Gavin blocking him, the room exploding into panic. But that was not the answer. When I realized you might have to know who I used to be," he said. Isla was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the console and rested her hand over his. "I like who you are now," she said. Damon swallowed against something thick in his throat. "Me too." And that was the truth. He was not just the man who had stopped a gunman. He was not just the man Clara had underestimated, or the man Gavin had ignored, or the man a room full of executives had finally learned to see. He was a father, driving his daughter home. He was a man who had chosen peace, and when peace was threatened, had protected it without losing himself. The next morning, Damon returned to the Aurelia Grand at 6. The brass fixtures still needed polishing. The floors still needed care. The building still required the quiet work no camera would ever celebrate. But when Damon walked through the service corridor, people met his eyes now. Not because he had become important, because they had finally understood he always had been. He smiled once picked up his cloth and began the day's work. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, the lights came on one by one. And somewhere between duty, family, and the quiet courage to change the world felt for a moment exactly as it should.